The quiet man at the palace gate. It was a cold and cloudy afternoon in London. The sky hung heavy over Buckingham Palace, casting a soft gray light on the historic stone walls and golden gates. Tourists bustled around the perimeter, snapping photos of the regal grounds, hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. But among the crowd, one man stood still. He wasn't holding a camera. He wasn't chatting or pointing. He was simply watching. Keanu Reeves had come to London for a quiet break between film shoots. He wasn't there to meet the Queen or walk a red carpet. He didn't call the press. He stayed in a modest hotel near the River Thames, rode a rented bicycle, and kept to himself. He didn't even tell his team where he was going that day. But he had heard something, just a rumor, that wouldn't leave his mind. It was about a royal guard. Not a famous one, not someone known in history books, just a silent man who had once done something heroic, something powerful. But no one knew what it was, and more importantly, the man never told anyone. Keanu didn't know his name. He didn't know his face. But he had read a small note in an old letter from a war widow whose husband had served in the special forces. The letter never mentioned the guard directly. It only said, "He saved the lives of 12, including my John. He never spoke a word. He vanished after. He stood outside Buckingham Palace, guarding it like a statue. He was more than a soldier. He was our ghost angel." That was enough for Keanu. He stood among the crowd that afternoon, his eyes scanning the royal guards in their tall bearskin hats and crimson jackets. They were all still, strict, proud. They were trained not to flinch, not to blink. But then, Keanu saw something different. There was one guard, older than the others. Most guards looked in their 20s, but this man had small lines on his cheeks, a hint of gray near his temples, and a certain heaviness in his stance, like he had carried more than just a rifle. Keanu's gaze lingered. The man never looked back, not once, not even when a child screamed nearby or a woman dropped her purse at his feet. He remained like stone, but somehow Keanu felt something stir beneath that still surface. Keanu stayed there for over an hour, and then he did something unexpected. He stepped forward, slowly, respectfully, and placed a folded note on the ground, near the guard's boot. The crowd gasped. A tourist whispered, "He's not allowed to do that." A guard nearby shifted slightly, uncertain, but the older guard did not move, not even a flicker. Keanu nodded once and stepped back. Later that night, in a small diner just outside Westminster, Keanu sat in a corner booth with a cup of tea gone cold. He didn't expect anything. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe the guard was just another man in uniform. But just as he reached for his coat, an envelope was slid onto his table. He looked up. No one was there. The envelope was thick, old paper. It had a small insignia on the front, a royal seal but not an official one. It was hand-drawn. Keanu opened it carefully. Inside was a single line, "I know why you came. Meet me by the lake in St. James's Park. Sunrise." Keanu didn't sleep that night. Not because he was nervous, but because something deep inside him was awake. Something that felt like purpose. At dawn, the air was crisp and the city still asleep. St. James's Park was quiet, its trees gently swaying in the breeze. Birds moved silently over the water. And by the small lake near a wooden bench, the older guard stood without his uniform. He wore a plain coat. Nothing about him said hero. His hands were in his pockets, his face calm. "You came?" Keanu said softly. The man nodded. "You left a note." "I read about you," Keanu said. "Not by name, just a mention. Something you did during the war." The man didn't blink. "That was a long time ago." "But it mattered," Keanu said. The man looked out at the water. "I was trained to keep secrets. That's what kept others alive." Keanu sat beside him. "I won't ask for details, but if you're willing, I'd like to hear the truth. Not for the world. Just for those who need to believe in quiet. Heroes." The man turned to him for the first time. "Why does it matter to you?" Keanu paused, because too many people think heroism needs a stage. Lights. Applause. But some of the strongest people do what's right and never say a word. The man's eyes softened, and then slowly he began to speak. His voice was low, like a memory. He talked about a mission deep in foreign land. A rescue. A betrayal. A choice between orders and lives. How he had stepped out of rank, disobeyed a superior, and saved 12 men from certain death, and how afterward he returned to London, declined a medal, and took a post outside Buckingham Palace as a royal guard. Not to be honored, but to disappear. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said. "I did it because it was right, and because someone had to." Keanu nodded, listening with full respect, not interrupting once. "So why now?" the man asked. "Why seek me out?" Keanu smiled gently. "Because the world forgets the quiet ones, and I think it's time we remember." The man looked away, and for a moment Keanu thought he was going to stand up and walk away. But instead, the man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, silver pin. It had no markings, no letters, just a simple shape, an eagle in flight. "This is what I took from that day," the man said. "Not a reward, not even a keepsake, just a reminder." He placed the pin in Keanu's palm. "You'll know what to do with it." Keanu looked down at the silver eagle. It was warm in his hand, though the morning was cold. And in that moment, he understood. He wasn't meant to keep the story for himself. He was meant to carry it forward. Whispers in the corridor. Keanu walked slowly back to his hotel, his fingers still wrapped around the silver eagle pin the guard had given him. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it carried the weight of everything the man had endured. The streets were waking up now, buses rumbled down the road, and people hurried past him on their way to work. But Keanu didn't hear any of it. He was still replaying the guard's voice in his mind, each word filled with quiet power. He reached his room and placed the pin gently on the desk. Then, without thinking, he sat down and started writing. Not a script, not a speech, just thoughts. A letter to someone he didn't know yet. Someone who someday might need to hear this story. Hours passed, but Keanu didn't stop writing. Later that evening, he had dinner with an old friend, Elaine, a journalist who had once interviewed him during a film festival. She wasn't like most reporters. She listened more than she talked, and she never twisted his words. They had stayed in touch over the years, quietly. When she asked how he was, Keanu hesitated. Then he pulled the silver pin from his pocket and placed it on the table. "What's this?" she asked. Keanu looked her in the eyes. "A story. One I'm not allowed to tell fully, but one that needs to be shared." Elaine leaned in. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious," he said. "But I need help. Someone who can write it with respect. Not for clicks, not for views. Just truth." Elaine held the pin carefully. "Whose is it?" "A royal guard," he replied. "Retired, no name, no face to the public. But he saved lives during a secret mission. And he never told a soul." "And you met him?" Keanu nodded. "He agreed to speak with me. Not to the world. Just to me. I think he wanted to pass it on. Not for glory, but because silence sometimes becomes too loud." Elaine's voice softened. "Do you want to go public?" "Not yet," Keanu said. "I want to honor him. Maybe through a story. A film, maybe. But not like the usual ones. No dramatics, just truth, humility, sacrifice." Elaine nodded. "I'll help, but we'll need something more than just your word. People will ask questions." Keanu pulled out the folded paper from his coat. The note the guard had slid onto his table at the diner. "This was how he found me." Elaine read it and smiled slightly. "He's clever, no signature, but the paper, this is from a royal binder, not public issue." Keanu smiled. "You always notice details." They made a plan that night. To write the story, but without names, dates, or classified events. Just moments. Emotions. Truths that couldn't be denied. But something unexpected happened the next morning. As Keanu stepped out of the hotel, a black car was waiting for him. Not flashy, just plain, polished. And, next to it, a woman in a gray coat stood holding a sealed envelope. "Mr. Reeves," she said gently. Keanu paused. "Yes?" "I've been asked to deliver this to you. From the palace." He blinked. "The palace?" The woman nodded. "Someone noticed your interest, and your discretion." She handed him the envelope and got back into the car. Keanu didn't open it right away. Instead, he walked to a quiet bench by the river. The wind brushed gently against his face as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It was written in precise cursive. "You met someone who has long remained in the shadows. We know who he is. We've known all along. We let him choose silence, and now you've stirred something in him that many of us never could. His story deserves peace. If you truly wish to honor him, come alone to the old war memorial beneath the West Tower at midnight. Say nothing to anyone. Bring only the pin. No name, no signature." Keanu stared at the letter for a long time. That night, he didn't tell Elaine. He didn't call anyone. At 11:45 p.m., he slipped out of his hotel and walked through the quiet streets toward the West Tower. It was darker than usual. The streets near the memorial were blocked off. No tourists, no lights. Just stillness. He found the memorial stone hidden between two tall hedges. It was older than the others, less polished. The words carved into it had faded over time. He stood in front of it and pulled out the pin. Within minutes, footsteps echoed behind him. He turned slowly. A man in a long coat stepped out from the shadows. He wasn't the guard. Not the one from before. This man had sharp eyes and a firm posture. "You kept your word," the man said. "I did," Keanu replied. "What is this place?" The man stepped closer. "This is where the ones who were never honored come to be remembered. Off the record, off the books. Some saved lives. Some broke rules for the right reasons. All chose silence." Keanu looked down at the stone. "So why bring me here?" The man took the pin from his hand. "Because you listened, and because you're not just an actor. You're someone who still believes stories can heal." He placed the pin at the base of the stone. "You won't see him again," the man added. "But he wanted you to know. You helped him sleep for the first time in years." Keanu's throat tightened. "Will anyone ever know?" he asked. The man smiled faintly. "Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But one day the quiet ones will rise in people's memories. And when they do, it will be because someone like you chose not to forget." Keanu stepped back, heart heavy but full. The man disappeared into the dark, and Keanu stood alone, watching the silver pin catch the moonlight on stone. The Queen's quiet message the next morning. Keanu sat by the window of his hotel room watching the soft drizzle roll down the glass. The streets of London moved slowly in the rain. Umbrellas bloomed like flowers as people hurried to work. But inside the room it was silent, peaceful yet full of thoughts that refused to settle. He hadn't slept. He kept replaying the midnight meeting. The stone memorial, the silver eagle pin, the man in the coat who spoke of the forgotten. It all felt unreal, like a scene from a movie. Except this wasn't a script. This wasn't fiction. This was truth wrapped in silence. On the table beside him, his phone buzzed. A message from Elaine. "We need to talk. Something strange just happened. Come quickly." Keanu grabbed his coat and left. When he reached the cafe where they had agreed to meet, Elaine was already there, pacing by the entrance. She wasn't her usual calm self. Her eyes were wide and her hands were shaking slightly. "What's wrong?" Keanu asked. She pulled a small envelope from her bag and held it up. "This was on my doorstep this morning. No one rang, no car, no footsteps. Just this." Keanu took it carefully and opened it. Inside was a letter written on fine cream paper, not typed. Handwritten, just like the one he'd received the day before. To the one listening. "Your silence has been noticed. Your respect has been appreciated. The story you seek to tell must be handled with great care. Not because it is forbidden, but because it belongs to a sacred few. There are names that cannot be spoken. moments that must remain unspoken. But truth has a way of finding light even in quiet corners. Beneath it, a single signature. Not a name, just the letter E written in elegant script. Keanu looked up at Elaine. "Do you know who E is?" She nodded slowly. "I've only heard of one person who signs like that in private messages. Queen Elizabeth did, and since her passing, her granddaughter, Princess Evelyn, carries the same tradition. She's known for honoring silent heroes. She supports private veterans' charities, helps those who never made the headlines." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "So she knows?" Elaine leaned in. "She knows everything, and she's watching." Keanu felt a strange stillness inside him. Not fear, not excitement. Just deep, quiet purpose. "Does she want me to stop?" he asked. "No," Elaine said. "She wants you to tell it carefully." They sat in silence for a moment, letting that settle. Then Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out a notebook. He opened to a page and placed it in front of her. "I've written the outline," he said. Not names, just the emotions. The choice he made, the lives saved, the silence that followed. Elaine scanned the pages slowly. Then she looked up with tears in her eyes. "This is beautiful, Keanu. It's not just a story. It's a mirror. People will see their fathers, brothers, even strangers in this man. That's what I want," he said softly. "Not a face. Just a feeling. The idea that someone out there did something incredible and walked away without a word." Few days later, Keanu received an invitation. It wasn't sent through his agent. It didn't come by official courier. It was delivered by a young boy who knocked on the back entrance of the hotel. "Are you Keanu Reeves?" he asked shyly. "Yes." Keanu smiled. "This is for you." The envelope was sealed with royal wax. Inside was a handwritten note. "You are invited to tea at the royal estate. Come alone. Bring only what is in your heart." Keanu didn't hesitate. That evening, dressed simply, he was taken in a quiet car through the countryside. The royal estate wasn't what he expected. It wasn't grand or overwhelming. It was calm. Quiet. A place of reflection, not power. He was led through a garden path lined with ivy and old roses, until he reached a small gazebo. Inside, sitting with a book on her lap, was Princess Evelyn. She looked up and smiled. "Thank you for coming." Keanu bowed his head. "Thank you for inviting me." "You've stirred things, Mr. Reeves," she said kindly. "But in a good way. There are stories in this land that deserve more than medals. They deserve memory. And sometimes, and it takes an outsider to remind us of that." Keanu sat across from her. "I didn't mean to stir anything. I just couldn't forget him." "And he couldn't forget you," she said. "When he saw your films," he told someone once, "that man understands silence." Keanu was quiet. Evelyn continued, "I won't stop you from telling this story, but I will ask one thing. Protect the mystery. Let people feel it, not just know it. Because some truths live longer in the soul than on the page." Keanu nodded. "I understand." She handed him a small book, bound in leather. No title. "What's this?" he asked. "His journal," she said. "He left it with us years ago before he disappeared into his new life. He said, 'If someone ever comes who truly listens, give them this.'" Keanu held the journal as if it were made of glass. "Tell it your way," she whispered, "and let the world remember the man who never wanted to be remembered." As the sun set behind the estate, Keanu left with the journal tucked safely inside his coat. He didn't say a word during the ride back because he knew the story was no longer just his to tell. It belonged to every quiet hero who ever chose silence over spotlight. The story he never told. Keanu placed the leather journal on the table of his quiet London flat. The room was filled with soft light from a nearby lamp, and everything around him was silent. Outside, the city moved with its usual noise. Cars, voices, footsteps on wet pavement. But inside this space, it felt like time had slowed. He stared, at the cover of the journal. His fingers hovered above it. He knew that once he opened it, something would change inside him. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was the inner world of a man who had never asked for applause, someone who had walked through fire and never spoke of the burn. Finally, he opened the cover. The handwriting was neat. Each word carefully written. The first page didn't talk about missions or battles. It talked about silence. There is a kind of silence that doesn't come from fear. It comes from weight, from knowing what you've done and carrying it like a shadow. I was trained not to speak, not just with my voice, but with my eyes, my steps, my hands. I never asked for praise. I only asked for peace. And yet peace never came. Only the silence remained. Keanu took a deep breath. He flipped through the pages. Each one was filled with short reflections, small glimpses of a man torn between duty and heart. He wrote about a mission in the eastern mountains. He didn't name the place or the country, just described the cold, the dark, and the decision that changed everything. We were supposed to follow orders, but something felt wrong. The village below had women and children. Our intel said it was a threat zone. I said no. I told my team to stand down. Command overruled me. They said to go in, so I acted alone. I crossed the hill. I entered the village, and I warned them. Keanu blinked, heart pounding. The next entry told of how the villagers vanished into the woods just hours before an airstrike. How 12 soldiers, his own men, refused to drop the signal beacon. How they were court-martialed later, but secretly, thanked by those who knew the truth. He read for hours. Page after page, a life revealed in fragments, stories of wounds that never bled on the surface. Nights spent guarding palace gates while pretending to be just another royal guard. Moments of doubt, flashes of anger, but also light. I saw a boy once running through the palace garden. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he laughed like the world wasn't broken. I wanted to laugh like that once, but I forgot how. Maybe that's the cost of silence. Keanu gently closed the journal, hands trembling. This man had carried so much, and now he had passed it to him. Later that week, Keanu returned to Elaine. They met at a quiet rooftop cafe overlooking the Thames. The wind was crisp, the sky painted with soft gray clouds. He handed her the journal, but she didn't open it. "You read it all?" she asked. "Yes," he whispered. "Do we use it?" Keanu nodded. "But not word for word. We use the spirit, the soul of it. We create something that tells his story without exposing him." Elaine understood. She always did. And so, the two of them began writing. They spent days outlining a screenplay that didn't name the guard, the mission, or the place. Instead, they told the story through emotion. A man torn between orders and conscience. A soldier who walked away from glory to live in the shadow of royalty. A stranger who stood still while the world passed by, never asking for anything, yet giving everything. The story was quiet, but powerful. They sent the draft to a small production company known for making respectful, story-driven films. Not blockbusters, not action-packed, just honest work that moved people. A few weeks later, they received a reply. "We're in." No press, no media storm. Just you, your story, and a camera. Filming began quietly in the Highlands of Scotland. The actor playing the guard was chosen not for fame, but for soul. He had kind eyes, a steady voice, and the kind of presence that said everything without saying a word. Keanu didn't act in the film, he directed. He poured his heart into every frame. He remembered the words from the journal, the man's silence, the night by the memorial, the message from Princess Evelyn. During one emotional scene, the actor stood at the edge of a quiet village, staring at the mountain where the airstrike never came. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just breathed. And behind the camera, Keanu wiped a tear from his eye. The film took 4 months to complete. It had no flashy trailer, no big premiere. They released it on a small streaming platform, with a simple message. A tribute to the heroes who never asked for thanks. At first, only a few people noticed. But then something unexpected happened. A retired soldier from Canada wrote a comment under the video. It read, "I knew a man like this. He saved my life. I never found him again. But this feels like him." Then another comment from Germany. "I served with someone who refused a medal after disobeying orders to protect a village. He vanished afterward. Maybe this is about him." And more came in, from all over the world. My father told me about a ghost soldier who saved their unit during a mission they weren't supposed to survive. I met a royal guard once who looked at me like he knew more than the rest. He stood, so still. But there was pain in his eyes. "I'll never forget him." Keanu read every comment. And he realized something. Maybe the story wasn't just about one man. Maybe it was about many. Men and women who stood in silence, made impossible choices, and disappeared quietly into the world. And maybe, just maybe, this film gave them a voice without making them speak. As the film began to spread quietly, Keanu received a final letter. No envelope, just a folded paper left in his mailbox. "You did it, and I finally slept through the night. Thank you." No signature, just a silver eagle pin taped gently to the page. The ripple he never saw news of the film began to spread, not through ads, not through headlines, but through whispers. Through people who watched it in silence, wiped their eyes, and told a friend, "You have to see this." It wasn't loud, it wasn't viral, it was quiet, like the story it told, but powerful. It started with veterans, retired soldiers from all corners of the world began reaching out. Some left comments under the video. Others wrote letters to the small studio that hosted the film. They didn't want recognition. They didn't want applause. They just wanted to say, "This was real. This happened. Thank you for remembering us." One letter stood out more than the others. It was written by a woman named Margaret, now in her 70s. She had been married to a British soldier who never returned from a secret mission overseas. Her letter read, "My husband never told me what happened during his final tour. But in the weeks before he left, he spoke about a man, a guard, someone who had made a choice that changed everything. He said, 'If something happens to me, tell our son about the man who stood still and saved a village.' When I saw your film, Mr. Reeves, I knew. It was him. You captured his soul. I don't know how, but you did." Keanu read her words in a quiet room. He didn't cry. He just closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." But the impact didn't stop there. A teacher in Romania showed the film to her high school class. After the screening, one of her students stood up and said, "My grandfather was a soldier. He never talked about the war. Last night, after we watched this, I asked him again. And this time he opened up. He told me everything. And then he cried." In India, a retired major donated a large sum to a small charity supporting widows of fallen soldiers. He attached a note, "Because of a story that reminded me who we were." And quietly, in royal circles, the conversation began to change. Princess Evelyn hosted a private gathering at her estate. No press, no cameras, only a few trusted guests. Among them were silent heroes, people with stories like the guard, people who had never spoken about what they had done. She showed the film at that gathering. Afterwards, no one clapped. They just sat there, eyes red, hearts open, and for the first time, some of them spoke. "I never told anyone," one said. "I carried it alone," said another. "Thank you for helping us feel seen." Keanu didn't attend that screening. He wasn't invited, and he didn't need to be, because the ripple had begun. One night, Keanu was walking alone through St. James's Park, the same park where he had first met the guard. It was just past sunset. The lights were coming on. The trees were rustling gently. He sat on a bench near the lake watching ducks glide across the water. An old man walked by. He wore a long coat, moved slowly. His face was lined, but his eyes were sharp. He paused in front of Keanu, looked at him for a moment, then sat beside him. They didn't speak at first. After a while, the man said, The one you honored? He's not the only one. Keanu nodded. I know. The man looked forward. We were trained to be invisible, not just in the field, but in life. We returned but never really came back. It's hard to explain that kind of silence. Keanu didn't reply. The man took a small item from his coat, not a pin, not a letter, but an old folded photograph. He handed it to Keanu. He was my captain, the man said. He never made it back. But before he left, he gave me a message. He said, if you ever meet someone who sees beyond the uniform, give them this. Keanu unfolded the photo. It was a young man in uniform smiling faintly beside a field hospital. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, sometimes you don't need to speak to change the world. Just stand still, and the world will hear you. Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat. He looked up, but the old man had already begun walking away. Keanu stood, called after him. What was his name? The man paused, turned his head slightly. We never gave names. We just gave everything else. And then he vanished into the trees. Keanu sat down again, the photo in his hands, the world around him turning gold with twilight. He understood now that this story would never truly end. It would live in the hearts of those who needed it. In silent soldiers, in grieving families, in children who grew up without answers. The ripple had reached them, and it had come from a man who never spoke a word about what he did. Keanu returned to his hotel and placed the photo next to the silver eagle pin. Both were symbols now, not of war, but of choice, of stillness, of courage that didn't shout. He called Elaine. I want to do one last thing, he said. What? She asked. A memorial, he replied. Not a statue, not names, just a place, a bench maybe, with one word carved into it. What word? Keanu smiled. Silence. Silence remembered forever. Months passed. The world kept moving. Cars filled streets, screens filled lives, and noise filled every corner of the internet. But somewhere in the heart of London, tucked inside the quiet green of St. James's Park, a single wooden bench appeared. No ribbon, no speech, no crowd. Just a bench facing the still lake, carved with one word on its backrest. Silence. Beneath it, a small metal plaque with a simple message. For those who served without applause. For those who stood without asking. We remember you. Keanu didn't tell anyone he was the one who paid for it. He didn't call the press or post it online. He simply visited it one morning before sunrise, stood there for a moment, and placed the silver eagle pin gently on the wood. And then he left. But something strange began to happen after that. Every few days, people started leaving small things on the bench, not flowers or flags, but things that mattered to them. A folded letter, a child's drawing of a soldier, an old medal. Once, even a single dog tag with no name. And people sat there, some in uniform, some in silence, some in tears. They didn't speak to one another. They just sat, and something passed between them, something unspoken, something shared. The city began to take notice, not in the way of viral trends, but through quiet recognition. A woman walking her dog stopped one morning, read the plaque, and whispered, "My brother." A man in a business suit paused during his jog, closed his eyes, and said softly, "Thank you." A teenager sat there after school, holding his grandfather's badge, trying to understand who he really was. The bench became more than wood and metal. It became memory. Keanu kept watching from afar. Sometimes, when filming brought him back to London, he would walk through the park unnoticed, sunglasses on, cap pulled low. He'd glance at the bench, see someone sitting there, and walk past without saying a word. But every time he left something, a coin, a pressed flower, a note with no name. And slowly, the story behind the bench began to spread. Not through interviews, not through social media posts, just through people. A retired palace guard told a young tour guide, "There was a man once, He never flinched, but he saw everything. A young soldier in training whispered to her roommate, "My instructor made us watch that old film. Said if we understand the silence, we'll understand the weight." And far away, across the ocean, a veteran walked into a support group and finally spoke after 10 years of silence. He said, "There was a bench, in a park, and somehow, it told my story. The ripple had become a wave, and still, the man behind it never stepped forward. The quiet guard was never named. No photo of him was ever shared, but he was everywhere now, in hearts, in memory, in the space between words." Keanu eventually returned, to that same diner from long ago, the one where the envelope had first appeared. He sat at the same corner booth, ordered the same tea, and waited. He wasn't sure what he expected, but as he looked out the window, a man walked by. Old, steady, same coat. He paused, didn't look in, didn't wave, but touched the brim of his cap and walked on. Keanu smiled. He didn't need to follow. He knew. Back at the hotel, Keanu sat with Elaine one last time. "The world's loud," she said. "Too loud." He nodded. "But this stayed quiet," she whispered. "Because it had to," he said. "Because not every truth needs to echo. Some are meant to hum in the chest like a heartbeat." They sat in silence, and it felt right. Years later, long after the film had faded from the trending lists and long after the world had moved on to new stories, the bench still stood in St. James's Park, weathered, strong, silent. A child once asked her mother, "What does silence mean on that bench?" The mother smiled. "It means someone did something very brave and didn't need the world to know." And in that moment, the legacy of the quiet guard lived on. Not in fame, not in statues, not in books, but in understanding, in quiet strength, in humble hearts, in every person who sat on that bench and remembered, without knowing what, or who, or why. Because sometimes you don't need the full story, you just need to feel its truth, and that's how a silent man standing still at the palace gates changed the world, through silence that echoed louder than any voice ever could.